I found out she'd been sleeping with my best friend the same day I signed the divorce papers. It was the first time in months that I had felt something, anything, other than numbness. The cold emptiness that had hung over me for what seemed like an eternity cracked for a brief moment, replaced by a searing heat that burned through every inch of me. I remember staring at the papers, the ink still fresh, the weight of finality sinking in, when my phone buzzed with a message. It was from a number I didn't recognize. He's been with her all along. At first, I thought I misread it. I almost wanted to. But I knew, deep down, that I had to know the truth. The truth about him, Chris, my closest friend, the man who stood beside me through everything, and her. Sophie. My ex-wife. The woman who once said she loved me, until the love vanished like smoke, leaving behind only the ashes of what we had. Sophie always had control. She knew how to twist the narrative, how to make people, me, believe in her version of things. I was the hard-working, steady one, the one who would always provide. She was the beautiful, rich, untouchable force who'd swept into my life like a whirlwind. I thought I had it all, the dream job, a charming house, the perfect wife. She was my world. But in the end, I was just the placeholder, a background figure in the story of her life. She never thought I'd leave. In fact, she bet I wouldn't. After all, what did I have to my name but a pile of student loans and a beaten-up sedan? She, on the other hand, came from money, real money. Her family had a string of investments, properties, and connections that I could never have dreamed of. When we met, I was drawn in by her power, her charisma. She was untouchable, and I was nothing but an ordinary guy with average aspirations. I guess that's what made her love me at first. I was someone she could mold, someone she could control. At least, that's what I thought. I had learned, painfully, that what Sophie wanted, she got. And that included taking Chris from me. The betrayal hit me like a ton of bricks, but I wasn't surprised. Looking back, there had always been little signs, disguised as innocent flirtations, harmless glances, but I was blind to them. They never crossed the line, not until it was too late. In the weeks leading up to the divorce, she had convinced me that I was the problem. She made me question my worth, made me doubt everything about myself. It was always something else, my job, my lack of ambition, my inability to fit into her world of champagne brunches and luxury vacations. She wore her wealth like armor, using it to crush anyone who dared to challenge her. And I, an overworked middle-class professional, was no match for that kind of force. What I hadn't realized was that the person I thought I loved was never the person I thought she was. Sophie was a master at manipulating people, and I was the pawn in her game. And now, after everything, the divorce, the heartbreak, the emotional devastation, I was finally seeing her for who she truly was. A woman who believed she was above it all, who could make and break people at her whim. But what she didn't know, what she never saw coming, was that I was finally done. Done with being weak, done with feeling small. She'd made her bet, and now I would make mine. 3 years later, I stood in front of her again, and I could see it in her eyes. The regret. The realization that I wasn't the man she thought I was, that I wasn't the man she could control anymore. She had made her move, and now it was my turn. I never saw it coming, the slow suffocation of everything I once believed in. Looking back, it's hard to pinpoint exactly when things started to unravel, when I started becoming a stranger to myself. I was always the dependable one, the one people could count on. I was good at that, too good, maybe. I got my degree in accounting, fought for every internship, worked overtime just to prove that I was worth it. And I did it all for her. Sophie was everything I wasn't, or so I thought. She came from old money, her family owned several properties, had investments in technology, and ran in circles that I could never have imagined. When we met, I had just gotten my first real job at a small accounting firm. The firm was decent, but I never expected it to make me wealthy. It paid the bills, helped me keep the lights on in my cramped apartment, but there was no glamour in it. No one outside of my small, struggling world would ever have known my name. Sophie, on the other hand, was a name that carried weight. She came from a world that demanded attention, that rewarded status over substance. The first time I saw her, she was at a charity gala, one of those extravagant affairs where everyone pretended to care about the cause while secretly sizing each other up for future business deals. She was standing near a group of well-dressed men and women, her effortless beauty and grace so commanding that I couldn't help but be drawn in. She noticed me first, not because I was particularly handsome or charismatic, but because I was out of place. She was used to men in sharp suits and expensive cologne. I wore my best tie, a shirt that had been ironed the night before. And still, she noticed me. I didn't have the luxury of growing up with silver spoons or trust funds. I came from a blue-collar family, where every dollar mattered, and every meal was hard-earned. My father worked as a mechanic, and my mother ran a small bakery in the town center. We weren't poor, but we were far from wealthy. I learned early on the value of hard work, the necessity of perseverance, and the crushing weight of financial insecurity. I didn't mind it, at least, I didn't think I did. It was the life I knew, the life I accepted. But Sophie's world was different. It wasn't just about wealth. It was about power. Power over people, power over situations. Sophie had been raised to believe that her status was unassailable, that her life was something to be flaunted, to be envied. To her, I was just another rung on the ladder, a man who could help her maintain her image. She never seemed interested in my background, my struggles, or the fact that every paycheck I received was hard-earned. No, I was merely the man who could make her look like she had a normal life, someone she could take to family events, someone she could put on display when needed. At first, I thought it was just the way the world worked. She was rich, she had power, and well, I had ambition. I told myself that one day, I'd make it. I'd rise above the financial strain and prove to her, to everyone, that I was worth more than just a middle-class project. And Sophie? She didn't mind. She wasn't looking for a partner, she was looking for someone to help her feel like she could control something, someone who wouldn't challenge her. I was perfect for that. The first few years of our relationship felt like a dream. We were in love, or so I thought. The affection she showered on me was intoxicating. She made me feel special, chosen. She seemed genuinely impressed by my drive, by the way I fought tooth and nail to get what I wanted. But looking back, I see the signs. It was always about her. Always about what Sophie needed, what Sophie wanted. I was her trophy to show off, her accessory, the man who fit into the image she wanted to project to the world. Then came the marriage. It felt inevitable, like a next logical step. I thought it was a reward for all my hard work, she thought of it as a transaction. We would be married, and she would have the perfect life, the one she could hold up to her social circles and say, "Look, I've got it all. I've got the man, the career, the money. I'm untouchable." But beneath the surface, things were already changing. My job at the firm was consuming me. I started working late hours, taking on more responsibility, and in doing so, I found myself more isolated from Sophie. She, meanwhile, was living in a world that didn't understand the meaning of work-life balance. She was mingling at expensive dinners, attending exclusive events, flying to Paris for the weekend, an existence I could barely keep up with. There was a time when I tried to get ahead. I considered going back to school for a master's degree, hoping to build a career that would elevate me into a higher tax bracket, hoping to impress her. I wanted to show her that I could be more than just her middle-class husband. But Sophie didn't care about that. She was already secure in her world, and if anything, my attempts to climb out of my financial situation only made her grow more distant. The distance between us grew like a slow, creeping fog. Sophie spent more time with her friends. People who had no concept of struggle, people who didn't know what it meant to worry about rent or health insurance. And I spent more time working late at the office, coming home exhausted and bitter. We were two different people, living two different lives, yet we were still tethered by the illusion of our shared future. And then, she bet on my weakness. I guess that's where it all started. The moment she decided I would never be enough, never strong enough to stand up to her. I was too invested in the idea of us, of being a part of her perfect world. She thought I would always need her. And in the end, that belief, her belief that I was disposable, led to the one thing I never saw coming, her betrayal. I had spent years pretending I was okay with being invisible in her world, and in the end, that very thing, the vulnerability of a man who was never quite good enough, became the foundation of the revenge I would eventually plan. I wasn't just seeking retribution. I was seeking the chance to finally stand in the light, to make her see me for who I truly was. Not her lesser, not her pawn, but a man who had been broken, but would rise again. And this time, I wouldn't be anyone's second choice. I wouldn't be anyone's backup. I was done being invisible. The night it happened wasn't the first time I'd felt like something was off. In fact, there had been a few moments in the months leading up to the end, tiny cracks in the facade of our marriage, that I couldn't ignore. But I told myself I was overreacting. I told myself I was just stressed from work, that Sophie was just busy with her charity events, her friends, her important life that I never quite fit into. It wasn't until that night, the night I came home early from the office, that I saw it. I had been working late at the firm, as I had been for weeks. The deadlines were relentless, and I was clawing my way towards something I thought was important, a promotion, recognition, stability. It was one of those late nights that stretched into the early hours of the morning, and I was running on fumes when I decided to stop by the house. Sophie had been out at a gala, some event she had been going on about all week, and I figured she'd be too tired to come home until much later. But I wasn't prepared for what I walked in on. I remember the exact moment the door swung open. The house was dim, just enough light spilling through the windows to create long shadows in the hallway. I didn't hear anything at first, no sound of movement, no rustling. The air felt thick, like I had interrupted something, but I didn't know what. I dropped my briefcase by the door, the soft thud echoing through the silence. I walked through the house, past the kitchen, down the hall toward the living room. I expected it to be empty, the way it always was after Sophie returned from these events. I thought I'd find her sprawled out on the couch, sipping wine, scrolling through her phone. But as I rounded the corner, I stopped dead in my tracks. There they were. Sophie and Chris. On the couch. Tangled together in a way that made every cell in my body freeze. Her head was resting on his chest, her hand grazing his arm. It wasn't just a casual touch. It wasn't friendly. It was intimate, possessive. I had seen them together hundreds of times before, but I had never seen this. Not once, in all the years we had been married, did I ever suspect that something like this was going on. Sophie and Chris had been close, too close, in hindsight. He had been my best friend since college. He was the one I turned to when things got rough, the one I trusted above everyone else. But now, it was like my whole world had splintered in front of me. The shock was too overwhelming to process immediately. I stood there, unable to move, unable to speak, watching them. My heart raced, pounding so loudly I was sure they would hear it. But they didn't. They were too absorbed in each other. Sophie looked up first, her eyes locking with mine. For a second, there was nothing but a look of mild surprise on her face, as if she hadn't expected me to be home. But it wasn't guilt. Not the kind I had imagined. It wasn't regret, shame, or even confusion. It was almost like I was an inconvenience to her, a background noise to the scene playing out before me. And then, a flicker of recognition crossed her face. Something like realization. She was caught, but not in the way I expected. She didn't seem afraid. She didn't seem apologetic. She simply said, "It's not what you think, Jacob." Not what I think. The words hit me harder than any slap could. I had spent years living under the assumption that I was the one who wasn't enough, that if I just tried harder, did more, made more money, Sophie would be happy. That I would earn her love. But here she was, in the arms of my best friend, with no shame, no explanation. My throat tightened, my voice barely coming out in a whisper. How long? She didn't answer right away. Her eyes flicked to Chris, who had finally sat up, looking disoriented but calm. Calm. Like this was just another day. He reached for her hand and squeezed it gently. There was no hesitation, no guilt in his actions. It was as if this had always been part of their secret, their plan. Jacob, he began, his voice flat, we didn't want you to find out like this. I laughed bitterly, the sound cutting through the air. Oh, really? You didn't want me to find out? That's rich. I stopped myself, unsure if I could finish the sentence without shattering into pieces. You've been sleeping with my wife. It's not like that, Sophie cut in quickly, but the urgency in her voice didn't change the reality. She'd been sleeping with him, hiding it behind closed doors, pretending to be the perfect wife while betraying me with the one person I thought I could trust. All these years, all this time I had spent building a life with her, and I hadn't seen it coming. I hadn't noticed the subtle shifts, the late nights, the secretive whispers between them. The truth felt like a weight pressing down on me. It was suffocating. The power imbalance between us, between me and Sophie, was never more apparent than in this moment. She had power over me in ways I hadn't even realized. Not just with her wealth, her connections, but in the way she controlled the narrative of our lives. She made me believe that I wasn't good enough for her. That I was lucky to be with someone like her. And now, here she was, in the arms of the one man who had always been my equal, my partner in crime, the one person who knew everything about me. I had always been the underdog. The guy with dreams too big for my station. The guy with too much ambition but not enough resources. Sophie had known that. She had known how to twist me into the perfect role, a man who would adore her and never challenge her. And Chris, well, he was the perfect accomplice. He had everything I didn't: confidence, wealth, charm. He could slip into her world with ease, while I was always trying to catch up. The betrayal wasn't just romantic. It wasn't just about love. It was about everything I had built, everything I thought I had worked for. It was about the painful realization that I had been nothing but a pawn in someone else's game. Sophie didn't care about me the way I thought she did. She never had. She used me, discarded me when I no longer served her purpose. I stood there for what felt like hours, unable to speak, unable to move. Finally, Sophie spoke again, her voice softer now, almost apologetic. I didn't want to hurt you, Jacob. But this was inevitable. Inevitable. The word sent a chill down my spine. You think this was inevitable? You think it was inevitable that you'd destroy everything we built? You think it was inevitable that you'd betray me, your husband, with the one person I trusted most? She didn't respond. She didn't have to. The damage was done. And at that moment, I understood. I understood that I had been a fool to believe that love was enough to overcome everything else. It wasn't enough. Not for Sophie. Not for Chris. And that truth, shocking, devastating, and painful, was the one thing that would drive me toward the revenge I was about to plot. It was time for me to stop being the pawn. To stop being the invisible man in their world. It was time for me to rise from the ashes of betrayal, to take back the power they had stolen from me. The shock of discovery, of seeing them together, left me shattered. But I learned something in that moment: it was not enough to just feel the hurt. It wasn't enough to simply walk away and let them think they had won. No, if I was going to regain my dignity, if I was going to get what was mine back, I had to make them feel the same agony I had felt. I had to make them understand the consequences of their betrayal. But I couldn't do it in some rash, impulsive way. That would be the old me, the man who acted out of desperation and emotion, the man Sophie and Chris thought they knew. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break down. I wasn't going to make the mistake of becoming their victim again. No, I had to plan. Carefully. Strategically. I had to become someone they never saw coming. I started by distancing myself. I knew that the best way to get under Sophie's skin was not to be the man she had controlled for all these years, the man who clung to her for validation. I needed to disappear in plain sight. So, I did what I had always done when life felt out of my control, I buried myself in work. The firm offered me an opportunity to take on a large project, a deal that would keep me occupied for months. I took it, throwing myself into it with everything I had. But this time, I wasn't just working for the promotion. This time, I had a different goal in mind, I was going to make myself indispensable. I knew Sophie wouldn't care if I was busy. She didn't care about the real me, the man behind the accountant, the person who wasn't just a project. No, she was too consumed by her own world to notice anything I did unless it suited her. So, I made sure to keep the momentum going. I made sure that the deal I was working on would not only bring in a large paycheck but would also put me in touch with some of the wealthier, more influential people in the business world, people like her. People who lived in the same circles she did, but who had the power to see me as something more than just another middle-class nobody. But that was only one part of the plan. The next part was more subtle. I had to get inside her head. I had to turn the tables. I reached out to her inner circle, the friends and acquaintances who had always been too eager to help her maintain her image. I started to gain their trust, to slowly infiltrate the social groups Sophie had kept me out of. This wasn't going to be easy. Sophie had always made sure to surround herself with people who looked down on me, who saw me as nothing more than a stepping stone in her life. But I knew these people were more than just socialites. They were opportunists, just like Sophie. And if I could manipulate their egos, if I could make them feel like they were better off with me, I would have a weapon. I began attending events that Sophie wouldn't expect me at, charity galas, business luncheons, art auctions. I played the part. I wore the right clothes, spoke the right words. I kept my head high, never showing any sign of weakness. I made it clear to everyone I met that I was someone they should take seriously. But the most important thing was Sophie. She needed to see me. She needed to feel my presence without me saying a word. She needed to witness my rise in the same world she had used to hold me down. At first, I wasn't sure it was working. She would occasionally send me a text or give me a call, asking how I was doing. She was trying to draw me back into her orbit, trying to remind me of the person I used to be, the man she thought was so easily controlled. But now, I am different. I could hear the desperation in her voice, and I fed off it. I made sure that every time we spoke, I was too busy to entertain her games, too absorbed in my new life to fall back into the old patterns. I kept her at arm's length, like a ghost from her past, someone she could never fully reach. But what I needed most was leverage. Real, tangible leverage. I began keeping tabs on Sophie and Chris. I was careful not to overstep. I didn't want to tip my hand too early. But I needed to know their movements, their weaknesses, their habits. Sophie had always been meticulous with her appearance, her business dealings, her social schedule. But I knew that beneath the surface, she wasn't as untouchable as she thought. I started following them, casually at first. I would observe their interactions in public, keep an eye on where they went, who they were with, and what they talked about. I didn't need to be there to hear their conversations, I knew where they'd go, what they'd do when they thought no one was looking. And that's when I found it, the opening I needed. It wasn't just that Sophie and Chris were seeing each other behind my back. It was how much they had been using their power to manipulate the people around them. Sophie had been skimming money from her family's business, laundering it through her charity events, all under the guise of helping the community. Chris had been involved in some of these shady dealings, using his connections to cover her tracks. And I knew something Sophie didn't. I had access to enough information from the deal I was working on to expose everything. I hadn't just been building a business network, I had been building the perfect trap. I started carefully planting seeds, making sure that the right people knew the right things. I fed information to people who were looking to get ahead in the business world, people who would jump at the chance to undermine Sophie's position. The more I fed them, the more they came to me. And soon, I had a small but powerful army of people who were willing to expose her dirty secrets for the right price. But I didn't plan to use this leverage just for money. No, I had a different price in mind. I was going to make Sophie beg for forgiveness, make her see that I wasn't the man she had discarded so easily. I was going to remind her that I could not only play her game but play it better. I would expose her greed, her manipulation, and her infidelity to the people who mattered most in her life, her family, her friends, and the circles she had always used to elevate herself. But I wouldn't do it all at once. I had to time it perfectly, like a bomb waiting to go off at the precise moment it would cause the most damage. And Chris? He was a wild card. He thought he had been clever, that he had taken what was his. But he was just another piece in the game. He would fall, too, when the time was right. But above all, I knew one thing for sure, I wasn't going to be the pawn anymore. This time, I was in control. The weeks leading up to the moment of reckoning felt like a slow burn. I had built everything to this point with the kind of meticulous precision Sophie had once underestimated in me. I had turned my vulnerability, my shattered self-worth, into the foundation of a plan that would strip away everything she had used to control me. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to confront them in some dramatic, cathartic outburst. Sophie had taught me that power is never about loud declarations. Power, real power, comes from silence, from observation, from taking the reins when your opponent least expects it. So, I waited. I waited for the right moment, the moment when Sophie's arrogance would meet the consequences of her actions. It came unexpectedly. Sophie had invited me to a high-profile charity event her family was hosting, a gala that would be broadcasted to her most influential contacts. She must have thought that after all this time, I'd come crawling back, seeking some form of reconciliation. But instead, I saw it as the perfect opportunity to finish what I had started. The gala was held at a luxurious penthouse overlooking the city, the kind of place that demanded attention. The kind of place where Sophie felt untouchable. She never saw me as I walked through the doors, blending in with the guests. I had learned to master the art of being invisible, of fading into the background, even in the midst of people who thought they were the center of the universe. As I made my way through the crowd, I could already feel the shift. People, friends of Sophie's, who once looked at me like a failed project, now greeted me with hesitant smiles. I wasn't the same person I had been when I'd first entered their world. The world where Sophie ruled, the world where she called the shots. I wasn't a forgotten piece of her past anymore. I was someone they needed to reckon with. Sophie was talking to a group of guests, her head held high, her demeanor flawless, her shield of wealth and privilege as polished as ever. She didn't notice me until I stood beside her, quietly, waiting for the right moment to make my move. "Jacob," she said, surprised but composed. "I didn't expect you to show up." There was no apology in her voice, no warmth. Just cold indifference. She was still the queen of her domain, and I was just a ghost from her past. But that was the last moment she would ever have that illusion. I smiled, but it wasn't the same smile I had once given her. It wasn't the smile of the man who had believed in her, who had followed her every command, who had thought that her love would save him. It was the smile of someone who had found himself again, someone who had learned to control his emotions and, in doing so, found a power she couldn't begin to comprehend. "I thought it was time to reintroduce myself," I said coolly, my voice steady. Her eyes flickered, but there was no shame there, no recognition of the devastation she had caused. Instead, she brushed a lock of her hair back, casting a glance toward Chris, who was standing at the other end of the room, talking to one of her business partners. "You're looking well," she said, her voice almost patronizing. I didn't let her words rattle me. "Thank you," I replied, watching her face carefully. "You look just like I remember. Perfectly put together." She smiled at the compliment, but there was a flicker of unease in her eyes now, something she couldn't fully hide. I could feel the shift in the air, like she was suddenly aware that the tables were turning, that the ground beneath her was no longer solid. I didn't waste any time. The plan had been too carefully orchestrated for delay. "Sophie, I have something for you," I said, pulling a small, unassuming envelope from my jacket pocket. "A little gift, really?" She raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued but still not worried. She took the envelope from me, her fingers brushing against mine. I felt a faint, involuntary jolt of electricity, a reminder of what had once been. But I pushed it aside. This wasn't about sentiment. This was about her fall. She opened the envelope, and her eyes widened slightly as she scanned the contents. The faintest tremor passed through her, but she masked it quickly, her gaze flickering to Chris once more. The envelope contained copies of documents, financial records, emails, even photographs, detailing the illegal dealings between Sophie and her family's business. The charity fund that was supposed to help the poor, the donations funneled into offshore accounts. And most importantly, evidence of her relationship with Chris. She hadn't been careful. She thought she could play both sides without consequence. But I had done my homework. Every thread, every lie, every betrayal had been meticulously documented. "This," I said, leaning in just enough for her to hear, "is everything. Everything you've been hiding from your family, from your friends, from the people who trusted you. I made sure everyone at this event gets a copy before the night ends." Her face drained of color, her mask of confidence slipping for the first time since I had known her. For a moment, she was exposed, raw, vulnerable. This was the consequence of her betrayal, the ugly truth that I was delivering with the same calculated precision she had used to destroy me. The power imbalance between us, the one she had built by making me feel small, was gone. In its place, there was only this reckoning, this moment of quiet, unspoken satisfaction. I didn't wait for her to respond. I didn't need to. The silence between us was its own answer. She had been outplayed. Not by a superior, not by someone with more money or status, but by a man she had thought too weak, too small to matter. And I had made sure to build my revenge slowly, methodically, until it was impossible for her to avoid the consequences. As I turned to leave, I caught Chris's eye. He was already staring at the envelope in her hands, his expression one of shock, of realization. But there was no sympathy in my heart for him. He was complicit, as much a part of her betrayal as she was. He would pay the price too. The rest of the night passed in a blur of strained conversations and half-hearted apologies. Sophie was nowhere to be seen. Her world, the one she had built on lies and manipulation, had started to crumble around her. But I wasn't there to watch her suffer. I wasn't there for the drama, for the melodrama that might have accompanied this moment. I was there to take back what had been taken from me. As I left the penthouse, I felt lighter. Not triumphant, not victorious in the way I had imagined in my fantasies. But restored. The man I had been was gone. He had been buried by the very betrayal Sophie had thought would define me. Now, I was the one with the power. The one who had won. The days following the gala passed in a strange kind of quiet. The storm I had unleashed with those documents, with the truth I had exposed, had done its damage. Sophie's empire of lies and manipulation began to crack in ways I could hardly have imagined. Her family, once blinded by loyalty, started questioning her, looking at her with the same contempt she had reserved for people like me. The charity that had been her prized showpiece disbanded. The foundation she had built her social status on, crumbling beneath her feet. Chris. He was left floundering, trying to salvage his reputation, trying to explain his involvement, but I knew it was too late. The damage was done. As for me, I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication. Just a quiet sort of relief. I had watched them spiral. Watched the life Sophie had once wielded as a weapon come crashing down in real time, but there was no sense of triumph in it. The destruction of her world, of her carefully curated life, wasn't a victory. It was a reminder of how far I had fallen. How far we had fallen. It had to happen. But that didn't mean it had to feel good. I think, somewhere deep down, I knew that the real victory wasn't in watching her lose everything, it was in watching myself walk away from it all, unscathed, whole. I had spent so many years believing that I was nothing, that my worth was defined by Sophie, by the approval of her world. Now, I could see it all for what it was. A lie. I had been worthy all along, I just hadn't seen it. Sophie tried to contact me a few times after the fallout. She left messages, texts that ranged from pleading to angry, and even a few desperate phone calls. But I didn't pick up. I didn't need to. She wasn't going to get the chance to manipulate me again. There was nothing left to say. She could no longer play the victim, the one who had been wronged. Not when she had been the one pulling the strings all along. In a way, the hardest part was the absence of any dramatic closure. There was no climactic confrontation, no emotional showdown where I finally told her everything I had felt. I didn't need to. I had already said everything I needed to say in those few moments at the gala. The quiet, steady confidence I had shown her was the last word. The last judgment. I didn't need to burn any bridges. I didn't need to gloat. What I needed was to build something for myself, something real. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about me. I took the next few weeks to focus on myself, on my work, my life, my goals. The promotion at the firm had come through, the recognition I'd wanted was finally mine. I found new friends, people who saw me for who I was, not for the person I had been in Sophie's shadow. I took up hobbies, things I had put aside for years. Running, reading, traveling. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. There was a quiet sense of pride in what I had accomplished. I had never needed her or her world. I had always had enough. In some ways, the man I had become, the one who could stand on his own 2 feet without needing anyone's validation, was the most satisfying revenge of all. Sophie had tried to mold me, break me, and when that didn't work, she had betrayed me. But I wasn't broken. I wasn't her pawn anymore. I was my own man. In the end, I realized that the emotional healing I had been searching for wasn't found in making Sophie pay. It was found in letting go. Letting go of her, of Chris, of the years I had wasted believing I wasn't worthy. 3 years had passed since that night at the gala, and as I stood in the apartment I had built for myself, an apartment I was proud of, looking out over the city, I felt something I hadn't in a long time, peace. True peace. Not the fleeting satisfaction of revenge, but the peace that came from knowing I had moved beyond the past. I had won. Not in the way I had expected, not in the way I had fantasized, but in a way that mattered more than anything else. I had reclaimed my life. Sophie. She was a ghost now. A part of my past, faded into memory. And I had no need to hold on to her anymore. I wasn't the man I had been when she left me. I was better. Stronger. And that, in the end, was all the victory I needed.